Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good morning. I'm Murray Rankin. I'm the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation for the province of British Columbia. We're here in Victoria. I'm honored to be on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. It's a very special day. It's an honor to be here in the company of President Chad Norman Day of the Tahltan Central Government, Premier John Horgan, Minister Josie Osborne, Minister of Land, Water and Natural Resources, and Justin Himmelwright, who is the Senior Vice President of Skeena Resources. Back in November 2019, the province made history when we passed unanimously the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, the first legislation of its kind in Canada. And just over a month ago, we also made history in releasing the first ever action plan under the Declaration Act. And today, together with the Tahltan Nation, we're making history again. I'd like to now welcome Premier John Horgan to offer his comments.
Thank you very much, Minister Rankin. Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to see you here this morning on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nation. To my friend Chad Norman Day, the President of the Tahltan Central Government, to Ken Edzurza, Vice President of the Tahltan Central Government, as well as to Justin Himmelwright from the Vice President Sustainability of Skeena Resources. Thank you for joining Minister Osborne, Minister Rankin and I today for what is a truly extraordinary announcement. And I want to particularly thank Chad for his work within the Tahltan Nation and across British Columbia to lift up the importance of partnerships as we build an economy that's inclusive, sustainable, and ready for a future that will involve more environmental, social, and governance issues as we talk to the investment community, not just here in British Columbia, but indeed around the world. And I'm reminded of the good work that the Government of British Columbia has done with the Tahltan Central Government on issues like the Clapan Plan to protect and preserve the sacred headwaters of the territory that Chad and Ken come from. This is truly inspiring to have the opportunity, a territory about 11% of British Columbia represented by the Tahltan people who have been there since time immemorial and opening up their hearts and their territory for focused economic development that will, of course, mean less uncertainty, more reconciliation. It will remove restrictions to economic growth and it will help us to build investor confidence. Minister Rankin talked about the landmark passage of the Declaration Act representing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples here in British Columbia. And over the past couple of years, of course, we've all been through some extraordinary times, whether it's been floods, fires, global pandemic. These have been challenges to our economy, challenges to our people, but we've been able to continue working collaboratively with the Tahltan to bring forward the first ever Section 7 agreement under the Declaration Act, which will mean a true partnership between the Tahltan and the Government of British Columbia, the people of British Columbia, in shared decision-making, an agreement that will allow us to see economic development like that, which Justin will talk about, but also saying to the world that British Columbia is a place of collaboration, it's a place of extraordinary natural resources, but also with Indigenous peoples who have been here since time immemorial, who want to cultivate and steward their lands, not just for the benefit of the Indigenous territories they represent, but for, indeed, all British Columbians. It's that action, that true reconciliation that we're talking about here today. We recognize the inherent right of the Tahltan to make decisions on their territory. The Tahltan recognize that they are part and parcel of British Columbia and Canada, and working together, we can do extraordinary things for the people in the territory, for the people in British Columbia, and indeed for people around Canada. This is the Eskay Creek project. It's going to be the first of its kind to go through environmental assessment and the Section 7 agreement, reducing uncertainty, allowing the investment community to know who they're dealing with, what the timeframes are, and how quickly they can get to yes, should that be the outcome determined by the two structures that are now coming together in harmony under Section 7. Globally, this is profound. when investors look to British Columbia, they will look to a territory, a jurisdiction that has shared decision-making at its foundation, so that we can develop the unique resources that we have here to meet the needs of a changing environment, one with climate change as a focus. We're talking about a gold-silver mine in this instance, but the copper in the Tahltan territory, which the Tahltan have been working with investors for generations now, is fundamental to the electrification of our economy, and it's this type of collaboration that will open up enormous opportunities, not just for the people in Tahltan territory, but indeed all British Columbians. It is a truly historic day. I am so proud to be here with Chad Normanday, the President of the Tahltan Central Government, with my colleagues, Minister Osborne and Minister Rankin, to deliver the first ever Section 7 agreement with many, many more to come. British Columbia is open for business in a collaborative way, in a sustainable way that starts and begins with the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples to have a say and determine what happens on their territory and how we can go forward together in the interests of all British Columbians. Haishko CM to all those who are here, and I'll pass the floor back to my friend, Mr. Rankin.
Thanks very much, Premier Horgan. I'd now like to call on Chad Normanday for his remarks.
Chad Normanday ushia siskias dot sehi thenius tumetsu jaat tlaguin nasta denethotia. Everybody, my name is Chad Normanday. I'm the president of the Tahltan Central Government. Huge day today. It's so surreal for me to be here, you know, in the Esquimalt, Songhees territories. I was here 8 years ago, finishing up law school, and if anybody had told me that 8 years later I would be in a position like this amongst my colleagues, you know, Ken, Adam, Ombriel, and with so many Tahltan people here in spirit, it's just incredible. I want to start by really thanking our ancestors in the Tahltan Nation and all those people who came before us, thousands of years before us, right up to, you know, the generations of my grandparents, my great-grandparents, people like my father. You know, I go by the name Chad Normanday in this position because I always want to honor my father, who was a residential school survivor. We obviously have hundreds of other residential school survivors in the Tahltan Nation, and they made so many sacrifices for us so that future generations like myself could go to school, could have a better education, could maintain our culture, and eventually get to a future where our rights and our title were better respected and we could start to co-manage, co-design, make decisions together in this province. I take my hat off to the NDP, to the Premier, to his colleagues for making history with the DRIPA legislation a couple years ago. Shortly thereafter, we signed a shared prosperity agreement in the Tahltan Nation, and this really builds upon that. I'm deeply honored that we are the first Indigenous group in British Columbia to sign an agreement like this. It's a huge accomplishment. It's shared by all the 4,000 Tahltan people out there. Hopefully some of them are tuned in today or can watch this later on, because this is really an accomplishment that we share together. It's extremely important that the province and the world understands that we have a very distinct world up in Tahltan territory. You know, if you went on Google Maps today and you pressed in Telegraph Creek, where my father and I share a home and, you know, where I take my kids during the summer, or you pressed in Tijuana in Mexico, it's faster for people in Victoria to get to Tijuana in Mexico than it is to get to Telegraph Creek. And it's extremely important that moving forward, Tahltan rights, Tahltan decisions, Tahltan values are at the heart of all of these projects. I often tell people that whether the government is orange or red or blue or green, the Tahltan Nation is always going to be covered in a lot of gold, silver, copper, and a lot of other minerals. So it's important that, that we build these structures and that we do it properly. And again, I just want to raise my hands to the government of the day, raise my hands to all those Tahltan people that came before me. I'm so proud to be Tahltan. Our team is doing the best we can so that you're proud of us, and I think this is a monumental step that we can take a lot of pride in, and that's going to lead to a more prosperous future for all Tahltan people and British Columbians. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Chad, and thanks for putting this day into a much broader context for all of us. I'd now like to call upon Minister Josie Osborne, the Minister of Land, Water and Natural Resource Stewardship.
Thank you so much, Minister Rankin. It's really wonderful to be here on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. And I'm incredibly pleased to be joined not only by my colleague, Minister Rankin, but of course, Premier Horgan, and to be here with President Chad Norman Day, Vice President Ken Adzerza, as we recognize the incredible work that they are doing to build resilient economies and communities for their people. It is really wonderful to be joined by others who are working tirelessly to support reconciliation and creating more opportunities for Indigenous peoples to be full partners in the economy. And of course, this includes Justin Himmelwright from Skeena Resources. Earlier this year, when Premier Horgan announced the new Ministry of Land, Water and Resource Stewardship, it marked a turning point in how natural resources will be stewarded in the years ahead. And it's not just a new ministry, it's a new approach to resource stewardship in our province. It builds on the progress that we've already made, working together on land and water and resource management to ensure that the natural resources sector supports three goals that matter to us all: reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, environmental sustainability, and economic opportunities. A cornerstone of my mandate is developing a new vision, a path forward with First Nations to build a land and resource framework that effectively co-manages natural resources now and into the future. And my ministry will be working with the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation on new joint decision-making agreements under the Declaration Act. The agreement that we're marking today with the Tahltan demonstrates what we can do when working in partnership, starting from a place of mutual respect and recognition. Working with First Nations will create a new resource stewardship system where we can decide together how to best use and care for the land for the benefit of all British Columbians, for communities, and for industry for generations to come. In addition to the work we're doing on joint decision-making and co-management of lands and resources, together we're focused on protecting and revitalizing wild salmon, advancing more sustainable water management, prioritizing conservation and biodiversity, including species at risk, addressing the cumulative impact of decades of industrial activity on traditional lands, and working together towards more agreements like the one we're marking today. This path forward or roadmap will not look the same for every nation, but no matter where we live in British Columbia, expanding and strengthening partnerships and making shared decisions on the land base will build greater predictability and create further opportunity for everyone, First Nations, industry, and communities. So together, we are today celebrating a remarkable milestone for the province and the Tahltan central government. The consent agreement on the Eskay Creek mine reopening project sets out how the two governments will work together with transparency and accountability and throughout the environmental assessment of the project. With shared decision-making, we're strengthening our shared commitment to the environment while supporting sustainable economic development. And it's a powerful example of what can be achieved by working together. It's the kind of progress that we will build on as we create a resource stewardship system that cares for the environment, it creates economic prosperity, and supports reconciliation. Today's historic agreement is one step forward on this journey together, and we look forward to the work ahead in partnership with First Nations across every corner of the province. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Minister Osborne. And I'd like to call on as our final speaker, Justin Himmelwright, who is the Senior Vice President for External Affairs and Sustainability at Skeena Resources. Justin.
Thank you, Minister Rankin. And good morning, everyone. I just wanted to say we're very, very excited as Skeena Resources to be here today with President Day, with Premier Horgan, Ministers Osborne and Rankin to announce this agreement. This is a very, very significant agreement between the Tahltan central government and the province of British Columbia. And we're just happy to have played some role in it. Eskay Creek is an existing mining project in Tahltan territory. It operated from 1994 until 2008. And during its time, it was the highest grade producing gold mine in the world. Skeena acquired this project in 2020, and we've been working in collaboration with Tahltan for a number of years to advance this project. The project today has existing road access. It has existing permitted tailings and waste rock management facilities. It's very, very close to green power thanks to the province's investment in the Northwest Transmission Line and the development of green power projects within 14 kilometers of Eskay Creek. So today, the project has all of these great assets that are a legacy of the previous project. The part that has been missing from the Eskay Creek project is because it was permitted in an era when Indigenous consent was not the standard of the day. It has never achieved formal consent from the Tahltan Nation. And so it's a very, very important step for the project and a foundational building block for the revitalization and the reopening of the Eskay Creek project. Skeena has been working with the Tahltan Nation since we started having projects in the territory around 2014. We have been collaborating on Eskay Creek on things like project design, on permitting of current operations, on mentorship and capacity building for the nation. And now today, we are a part of a collaboration for the process to achieve Tahltan consent for this existing mine. So it's very exciting for us, a very exciting day for the project, and we really, really look forward to continuing our collaboration with the Tahltan Nation and with the province of British Columbia to bring Eskay Creek back into production. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Justin, and thanks for telling us a little bit more about the nature of the project. And I want to salute you and your company for your excellent work in collaboration with the Tahltan. You know, just by way of concluding remarks, this is really an historic day. We use that word a lot, but this is the first consent-based agreement for decision-making ever to be negotiated under the Declaration Act, indeed anywhere in Canada. It's a tangible example of our commitment to reconciliation and a new relationship with Indigenous peoples. The Tahltan central government and the province, I say, are leading the way toward a new model for advancing free, prior, and informed consent, words that appear in the Declaration Act. It's a shift in the way we make decisions in our province with respect to First Nations and integrating their involvement in a fundamental way, something that has not been done before, recognizing the inherent rights of the Tahltan and providing a clear, stable, and sustainable path forward for industry. And that has, in this case, to do with the environmental assessment needed for the Eskay Creek Mine Revitalization Project, as was described by Justin. But it's a model that can be used in so many other ways and different types of decision-making in our province. So it's really no surprise to many of us that the first of these agreements would be with the Tahltan central government and the leadership of President Chad Norman Day and Vice President Ked Zerza, because, you know, they have been doing groundbreaking work for a long, long time. Some of you, the Premier mentioned the Clapan Plan, a land use agreement signed back in 2019 that's been having us work together in a number of ways, fundamentally to protect and manage the sacred headwaters while respecting the nation's inherent rights in the Clapan Valley. As we see here with the Tahltan First Nations leadership, innovation, decision-making is essential for an economy that works for everyone. And it will solidify British Columbia's leadership and competitive advantage in reconciliation. Because reconciliation and a healthy economy go hand in hand if we're going to continue to build a vibrant and prosperous British Columbia. At this moment, I'd like to now call upon President Day and Premier Horgan to join me in signing the actual document. That felt really good. I'd now like to suggest that the Premier come back here to the podium, and with assistance, we can take some questions from the media on this or other matters.
Thank you, Minister. As a reminder to media on the phone line, please press *1 to enter the queue. You're limited to one question and one follow-up. We do have media in the room today, so we will start there. Richard Zussman, Global News.
Premier, when UNDRIP was brought in, there were concerns raised about what this would mean in terms of timing for resource development projects and the confidence that it would give industry around how long the process would take. Now that we're at this point, what do you say to industry in terms of timing? Do you believe that UNDRIP slows down the process, speeds up the process, and what do you say to other First Nations who are contemplating projects in their own territory around how they can get to this point and what they should expect?
Well, thank you for the question. And I don't think I want to talk about timelines, and I'm not avoiding the question, but each project has different characteristics. And Justin has already said there's an existing road, there's tailing and waste rock permits in place for the former facility. So each project will be different, but what will be transformative for investment, what will be transformative for revenues to the people of British Columbia when our resources are developed it means that there will be certainty on the land with respect to the consent of Indigenous peoples. We have seen court rulings going back generations now that have asserted and confirmed the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples, and it's now high time that the government codify that. We've done so through the Declaration Act. We have amended our environmental assessment processes. Minister Haymond led an initiative there where joint decision-making was part and parcel of bringing forward the new Environmental Assessment Act. And now, with this Section 7 agreement with the Tahltan central government, those who want to make significant investments, and Mr. Himmelreich can discuss why they made the choice to continue to work in the territory, is because there is a government agreement between the province, the Indigenous peoples whose territory the project resides in, and of course we will be working with Canada to accelerate processes now that we have agreement on the ground with First Peoples. So will it shorten things? That depends on the project. What it will provide is certainty, and as we look at investment globally, more and more investors are looking at the environmental, social, and governance characteristics of the territory they want to go into. British Columbia is a safe jurisdiction to invest in, made all the better by agreements such as this.
Richard, follow-up?
On another issue, Global's done a series of stories over the last week about Jackson Glubis. He died in the healthcare system. His family has asked our news organization to help guide them through the system. Right now, there are numerous issues around privacy. The Privacy Commissioner has said that the family can use Global and other media organizations as a tool to get information. Will your government allow families like that to allow media organizations to, in essence, act on their behalf. Last week, your health minister said they wouldn't consider it. It seems counter to what the privacy commissioner is saying. These families are just looking for help. Will you allow them to use media organizations to get that help?
Well, I can't judge or determine what grieving families will do and how the media chooses to cover stories or advocate for individuals is, again, in the hands of the media. What I can say is we are governed by privacy laws, and the commissioner is a key component of that process. I'll have to take a look at what the commissioner has said, but I do know that were the shoe on the other foot and I was seeking information, I would want to ensure that people were advocating for me, and I would hope that we will be able to come to quickly a resolution so that the family can get the information that they need. But we are constrained by privacy laws, and we have to abide by those. And I appreciate the advocacy of media outlets or anyone else in the community on behalf of those who need assistance navigating sometimes very complex government processes and procedures. But I can't just push them to one side. We need to work within them. And if we need to amend those laws, then certainly we'll be happy to do that.
Rob Shaw, Check News.
Premier, the superintendent of the Mission School District says he's received correspondence from the government. There's a 2-year freeze on new school buildings because of the costs in the capital budget for flood and disaster recovery. Can you speak to that?
It's news to me. I'd like to see the correspondence. Certainly did not come from Treasury Board. We have no freeze in place. We have the largest capital budget in BC history, which is focusing on building new schools, seismically upgrading those that are at risk, as well as roads, public transit, and other infrastructure. So I'm not aware of the documents. It may have come from the school district. It may have come from somewhere else, but it didn't come from the Treasury Board, who makes these decisions.
Rob, follow-up.
The Souk School District, in your riding this morning, says it received $0 in major capital funding from the province for the 2022-23 school year. And as the fastest growing district in British Columbia, it will now have to look at operational budget use of portables because of this, and that it's not pleased with that. So understanding what you just said, there appears to be some type of lack of capital dollars in the budget from your government this year. Is that related to pressures felt elsewhere? And then to tie in the woolly mammoth into this, is that in any way, how are you going to deal with that when people are talking about the museum on top of that?
Well, first of all, I'm surprised that people are saying there's not enough investments in the Souk School District. We are putting up schools as quickly as we possibly can in the fastest growing district on Vancouver Island. There may not be new dollars in this capital budget, but there are projects that are in planning, projects that are in construction. Land acquisition is underway, not just in Souk, but in Surrey and other fast growing districts. There is no constraint on our capital budget at this time. With respect to the museum, as I've said, over the 8-year life of that project, it constitutes 1% annually of our capital budget. That is a modest amount to protect and preserve 7 million artifacts and archival documents that tell our collective history. Similarly, we're making massive investments in public transit, significant investments in bridges, roads, and other infrastructure. There's been no slowdown. We are concerned about inflationary pressures, as all British Columbians are, not just in meeting capital budgets, but just basic requirements. So there are challenges in the economy. I'm not suggesting there are not, but there are no directives from government that would constrain building the schools that are needed in Souk or Mission or anywhere else.
Moving to the phone lines, Justine Hunter, Globe and Mail.
Hi, thanks. I'm wondering if we can get some specifics around how this environmental assessment process might look different from the existing process in terms of timing, in terms of just any kind of detail you can give us. And also, is there still a federal environmental review required for this project?
I'll start with that, and then I'll pass it to Minister Rankin. There is still a requirement for a federal environmental assessment. However, now that there's a consent agreement in place through Section 7. Now that we have the proponent, the territory with which the activity will take place, as well as the province working, we believe that we can, as we have in previous projects, make the BC process the primary process, and the federal government will abide by the findings of our review. But I'll pass it to Murray to answer the specifics at the front end of that, Justine.
Thanks very much, Justine. And yes, the objective is to have the federal government confirm that the environmental assessment run by British Columbia will be substituted for the federal one, which has been done, of course, in other places in British Columbia. The difference between the normal environmental assessment process and this one is that this is a consent-based process by which the Tahltan central government, as the Indigenous governing body involved, will consent in advance to the process, and then the provincial government will run, as they would normally do, the environmental assessment to make sure that the land is protected as one would expect under a normal environmental assessment process, if I can call it that. But the fact is that there'll be the certainty that's up front that's created through this. We know where the Tahltan central government stands on the project, and that will provide Mr. Himmelwright and his company the kind of certainty that they often don't have in a regular environmental assessment process. The second thing I would say is that after the certificate is granted, assuming that it is on environmental grounds, then it goes to the permitting process. And our hope is that because of the robust involvement of the Tahltan along the way with the environmental assessment side of things, the permitting should go much more quickly. That's our hope.
Justine, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, thanks. I'm wondering, President Dave, you can talk a little bit about what this project would mean for your community. And do you have a sense of, I mean, maybe you can give this or somehow I can get the scale of the investment involved here from the company?
Thank you for the question. What it would mean to our community, I think it's really important for everybody to understand that a big reason why I believe Tahltan Nation and the Tahltan central government was the first one to sign an agreement like this is because we have very robust internal processes that provide the internal certainty that we require to then create certainty with the outside community, outside investors, companies, other governments, and things like this. So whether or not this project goes through is not going to be my decision. It's not going to be the Tahltan central government's decision. It's going to be a collective Tahltan Nation decision where all of our people will eventually have a ratification vote after a robust set of meetings, after we draft an agreement, all of these kind of things. So it's not something I can get into too much right now, but what I will say is that the Tahltan people will ultimately decide whether or not this project goes through, and the way that this is structured is that our consent is needed in order to operationalize and build this project. So it's something that the Tahltan Nation has never had before in an agreement. It's exciting, and I'm looking forward to bringing it back to our people and helping them understand that we have more tools in the toolkit than ever before, and we're going to make an assessment and have that internal conversation like we always do when Tahltan people make these decisions collectively.
I wonder if on the scale question, I wonder if I could invite Mr. Wright to say a few words.
Thank you, Minister Rankin. The Eskay Creek Revitalization Project is undergoing a feasibility study now, which we expect to be released in the next month or so, which will show some updated numbers. But based on the numbers that are public today, this represents about a $600 million capital investment to reopen the Eskay Creek mine. It represents about $730 million of direct tax revenue to the province. And roughly 300 to 500 jobs, depending on if you're in the operational or construction stage. So that's the scale of the investment. The mine operating life currently right now is projected at 10 years. So with the construction and closure phases on either end of that, it's about a 15-year project, about a $600 million investment.
Next question is from Amy Smart, Canadian Press.
How the government or the provincial government finds consent. I know in the past, Premier Horgan, when you've spoken about UNDRIP, you've said it doesn't represent a veto power. Is this a veto power?
I'll start perhaps. No, we've made clear, and during the debates when the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act was before the legislature, that it's not a veto power. But what it is the opportunity for consent to be provided. In the inherent right of the Tahltan central government to define what occurs on their territory is something we've committed to do, to provide under the Declaration Act and under the action plan itself. So we think that with the consent available at the front end and the hope that the project will be proceeding if indeed the environmental assessment is successful and if the Tahltan consent at the back end, that provides a great deal more certainty for industry. And I think that's the exciting feature of this particular agreement.
And I would just add to that, Amy, as I said, decades of Supreme Court rulings on inherent rights and title in British Columbia make it imperative that if we are going to continue to work together and collaborate on economic development on the land base, we need to have arrangements such as this through the declaration to ensure that every participant in the process has a meaningful contribution to make. That's what the investment community is looking for when they scan the world for places to make investments such as this. And as Justin's just said, it's a significant capex with hundreds of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues to the Crown, as well as the benefits, of course, to the Tahltan people. So I believe this is the way forward. It's not a veto. It's about getting certainty. And that's how we've been proceeding, and that's how I suspect the investment community will proceed as well.
Amy, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I'm just wondering in kind of a theoretical scenario where it's not a project that's specifically on one nation's territory, but crosses several territories. Say there is a pipeline through Tahltan, and the Tahltan decide they do not want to give their consent. What does that mean for the project?
Well, again, the declaration is a forward-looking document. It's not about relitigating past decisions by previous governments or previous Indigenous governing bodies. It's about how do we proceed going forward. And where there is jurisdictional overlap, historically, that has always been a challenge for investment, a challenge for the province, and most importantly, a challenge for the Indigenous governments involved. We are working through a variety of mechanisms. Minister Rankin can touch upon them in more detail, but the treaty process is still very much alive here in British Columbia. Many, many nations and collections of nations and final stages of treaty deliberations, as well as reconciliation agreements, which we bring forward regularly. And now the declaration allowing shared decision-making opportunities, not just on economic development, but other activities on and around the land base and the territory of Indigenous peoples. So I'm confident that there will always be challenges when economic activity is proposed, but we're trying to reduce the challenges and increase more certainty, and of course, most importantly, give Indigenous peoples a say on what happens in their territory.
Our last question today comes from Michael Wilcox, Black Press.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm just wondering if you have any other such agreements sort of in the works right now using UNDRIP Section 7 of the Declaration Act.
I'm getting whispers in the back. I know that, Murray. The answer to the question is yes, but again, a landmark decision such as this, as Minister Rankin has said, so appropriate that it be a partnership between the province and the Tahltan central government, who have been very entrepreneurial in their territory. Again, why investment goes to the territory is not just the abundance of natural resources, but skilled workforce, and working with a nation that understands the value of the territory that they have stewarded for millennia, and they want to make sure that they pick the right partners as well. So it's not a one-way street here. There's multiple avenues to benefits to British Columbia, and as we've articulated here, this project, the Eskay Creek redevelopment is ideal to be the first Section 7 arrangement that we sign, but there are many more to come, and that will in fact be the future for land development in British Columbia. That will give certainty to investors, give certainty to communities, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, as we go forward. We're pretty excited about it.
Michael, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I guess to just get some clarity on whether it's sort of an optional process to go through or whether it's required to go through Section 7 of the Declaration Act, sorry.
Well, I'm going to move that one to Murray, but where the opportunity exists, we're going to proceed with Section 7 agreements. Where there's still work to be done in terms of capacity, in terms of what the Indigenous government body looks like, and that's a term in the Act, but the Tahltan Central Government's a good example, and there are others. But I'll let Murray answer that question directly for you.
Thanks for the question. In the actual Declaration Act, it's a very short statute. There's a requirement that the province, before entering into Section 7 agreements, have a mandate. And to get that mandate, we have to demonstrate that we have consulted, looked widely with local governments, industries, and any First Nation who might have an overlap in the territory involved. So we have a very specific roadmap. One of the things that the province looks at is the governance capacity of the First Nation to see if they have robust decision-making that would allow us to go forward together. And I can't think of a better nation than the Tahltan Central Government for a robust decision-making processes going back a long way. And that is one of the features. So when we have shared decision-making, the province wants to be confident that we can work together with that Indigenous governing body, as the Premier said, which is a defined term, and it's the First Nation that will decide just what that Indigenous governing body looks like. And then we have another process where the Cabinet must approve that agreement. They're very exceptional agreements, but as the Premier said, I think we can look forward to many, many more in the years to come. Again, that's why this is such, I think, an exciting day for British Columbia. Thank you.
That's all the questions we have today. Thank you for joining us.